Hi, and welcome to the Veterans Corner. John, it's not on, is it? Hi, welcome to the Veterans Corner. My name is Chuck Woodin. I'll be your host as always. We have two special guests with us tonight. We have Lisa Philippon and Justine Ginsberg. They are from Resilience Grows Here. They've got a lengthy titles, so bear with me. I wrote them down. Lisa is the program coordinator, and Lisa's also a Gold Star mother.
Yes.
Thank you for being here, Lisa.
Thank you.
And Justine is the community health coordinator for the Farmington Valley Health District. I get that right?
Absolutely, spot on, Chuck.
And the program director for Resilience Grows Here.
Absolutely.
I wrote that down, wanted to make sure I got it.
You did great.
We got a great show here tonight. We're going to be talking about, as I said, Resilience Grows Here. Most of you probably haven't heard of that before, but it's a great veterans program, and we're going to learn all about it tonight. It's my understanding that Resilience Grows Here is a veterans mental health initiative with the Farmington Valley the Health District. There we go. Can you tell us a little bit about the program?
I'd be glad to, Chuck. The Farmington Valley Health District is the health district for the 10 towns of the Farmington Valley. And traditionally, public health districts or health districts are looking at the public's health, so it's about prevention. Yep. So we look at the most vulnerable members of our society, and we look at the things that most adversely affect them, and we create initiatives and public outreach to actually prevent further issues in their health. The Farmington Valley Health District has been a very lucky recipient of a grant from the Movember Foundation and the Prevention Institute for a men's mental health initiative. We know the veterans in our communities are increasingly at risk because of the mental health stresses that they have from their years of service. Equally, their families are at increased risk because of the service-related mental health challenges that our veterans return with. One of the things that we know is that there are many services for veterans within our community. The VA, for example, is an incredibly well-funded universal structure here within the United States of America. But what we know from research is from the veterans that take their lives, only 30% of those that take their lives had ever had contact with the VA. Yeah. So from a public health perspective, first of all, what went wrong with that 30%? And secondly, what happened to the other 70%? Why are they not accessing the resources that they need? So the Farmington Valley Health District launched the initiative Resilience Grows Here to deal with the mental health stresses that the men and women within our veteran population experience when they return home from service.
How do you define resilience? I mean, I'm sure people have different definitions of it.
Yeah.
How do you define it?
Look, I think my years working as a nurse, my years working in public health have showed me that all human beings are by nature resilient. Human life itself is resilient. I think it's often described as the ability to bounce back, it's described as grit, it's described as being able to endure and to kind of return to normal activity quickly. That's, something is resilient if it recoils back into shape.
Bounces right back.
Exactly, but what we do know for our veterans, particularly at this era of warfare, this country has never seen warfare like this. The theatre of war is completely different to what we've ever experienced in history. Many people aren't aware of the fact we've been at war for 17 years. Yeah. We have only 1% of the American population that actually step up and serve the community in the role of active service reserves. That's 1% of the population that are enduring 17 years of active warfare. One of the things we see again and again is repeated deployments. That wasn't the case once upon a time.
No.
So we have a weary service population, and a lot of the implications that we're seeing is because of that repeated exposure to trauma. We know that resilience is still innately within us, and we know that our warriors, more than any other group within our population, are resilient.
Yeah.
They get up every single day and they go back and do a job. They experience something that none of us would normally ever see in our lifetime. That's resilience.
In one day.
In one day. But they do it again and again and again. What happens is they return home and they're tired. They grow weary of being resilient. And the initiative Resilience Grows Here is working with not just our veterans, but with our communities, with the families of these veterans, to help to enable those resilient characteristics to not only be fostered within communities, but to help to remind our veterans that they're still within them.
Yeah, there's. I'm sure there's many reasons. I mean, let's hear it from you. Why is this program? Why is a program like this so important?
It's so important because of what they have done for us. They thought that we were important enough to put their lives on the line, so we should see them as being as important to pay them back and to help them to come home to communities that are embracing them and helping them to get back on their feet. There are so many different layers of difficulties that entail coming home. Their whole coming back into society that is not structured, and having to find jobs and having to start at the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak, when earlier serving in the military they had achieved different ranks and different medals. Exactly, and they're coming back to these societies where they're having to work at McDonald's. They don't have the skills that are required for going into business associates and such, but they have intangible skills such as leadership and discipline. They have ethical training. There's so much that they bring to the table that employers don't have to worry about. They're loyal. Our community businesses need to open up their eyes and their arms to embrace these individuals.
They're being overlooked.
Yes.
Well, there's a lot of stigma that's associated with our veterans and with people who have returned after service. I mean, the media is responsible for creating an image of what post-traumatic stress looks like. And, you know, unfortunately, the media portrayal is inaccurate, and we have this belief, or that the community has a belief system that these young men and women are broken, and they're not broken. They are experiencing the manifestations of a normal reaction to the most abnormal possible circumstances. One of the things that one of our funders' supporters, the Prevention Institute, they did a research study into community-based trauma, and what our men and women of the military are experiencing and exhibiting is no different to a child who has grown up in gang culture. It's no different to a child that has had the trauma of losing a parent early in life. Post-traumatic stress is experienced by many people within our community, but there's this stigma that is attached specifically to veterans that makes it so complicated for them to get work and for them to access services. They're trained to be strong. They're told to be tough. And when you come home and you ask for help, that somehow lessens your valor.
Sign of weakness.
Absolutely, and it's not. In fact, it is the greatest sign of strength to say, you know what, I'm not coping right now. I think I need help. But we have created a system, a clinical system, a medical model that works in some cases, but ultimately a medical model doesn't fit everybody.
No.
when we launched Resilience Grows Here, we talked about the fact that veterans return to communities, not to programs. We create programs and expect our veterans to fit inside these boxes, and no two experiences as an active service member is the same.
And even if they did experience the same situation, you're talking about two different people.
Absolutely. So to expect that the same pathway to recovery or to being able to normalise their life back here in in the civilian world is ridiculous, because no two human beings have the same pathway.
You can't use that typical, page 3. Okay, page 3. That's how we deal with this.
No.
It's all different. And this show here has covered a lot of issues with PTSD because it is an issue that it's very common, not only with our veterans, but our population. And it's shows like this that hopefully we can get out there and inform the public of what is what it actually is. It isn't. There shouldn't be a stigma attached to somebody because of that.
And look, I think we also we have lost the important thread of the moral injury of war.
Yeah.
Our young men and women perform a role that your average person couldn't even imagine.
No.
And then we bring them home, and I think there's a quote that says, we train our young men and women to go to war. We don't train them to come home, and to deal with that moral injury
Over and over again.
over and over again. And how does a young man come home and talk about what he's had to endure from a moral perspective to his mum or to his wife or to his sister? These are not experiences that are easily translated to the civilian population. So, the traditional means of treatment are not always the right pathway for many of our veterans.
Yeah, and it's just not men anymore.
No, absolutely not.
I mean the women are experiencing the same difficulties,
Absolutely.
the same situations,
Yes.
the same trauma, the same terror. Who are you working with as far as, actually, I had wrote this question down, and maybe you can help me out with that.
We are working with veterans from all of the wars. We see a lot of the Vietnam veterans. They are retiring, and now they are starting to look back on their history. And there's actually a very large number of Vietnam veterans that are now taking their lives. We work with active duty. We've been working with the 103rd Air Wing in East Granby. We work with reserves. Focus groups were done at both the reserve units in Plainville with the Marines and the 103rd. A little side note here, more than 730,000 National Guard and Reserve individuals have been used in these two wars, in Iraq and Afghanistan. That has not happened since World War II, and that number is larger than the numbers that were used in Vietnam and Korea. And so a lot of these, the reserves and the National Guard, they live between two worlds, the civilian world and the military world. I mean, they've got to pack up at a moment's notice, leave their jobs, and hop on that plane and leave their families and go to war.
And not know when you're going to come back.
And not know when or if you're coming back. We also are extending into the school system. Justine and Alicia Newton with Nourish My Soul is working in East Granby Middle School, teaching the youth resilience characteristics. They are learning how to be resilient in school. It's kind of odd. It seems like a basic characteristic that you would learn, but I don't think that children are learning those characteristics nowadays.
And you mentioned children. I mean, there's another group right there that have been traumatized.
Absolutely.
Yes.
They've got a parent that's been taken away, and some, depending on what age, they're not sure why.
Right.
And I mean, so there's a lot of trauma, and it affects them.
Yes, it does.
And school systems aren't informed about that. School systems don't understand the level of trauma that a child feels when a parent or a brother or a sister is deployed. And you know, part of the rationale behind Resilience Grows Here is we have to work with and educate communities. And communities are not just the nuclear family, they're the faith-based services. They are our school systems, they're the leadership within our towns. We've been so incredibly fortunate. The first selectman, Jim Hayden of East Granby, has thrown open the doors of his town and has said mental health is a priority. It is about talking to vendors, it's about talking to people who run establishments that are frequented by veterans. You know, we have to understand what veterans need. Service animals, access of service animals into department stores and cafeterias and, you know, common spaces we often shy away from or cause obstacles for veterans that don't need to be there. It's because we don't understand, and there's this stigma that exists in society.
Well, it's also, this is how we've always done it. This is the approach we've always taken. And you're dealing with 1% of the population. You're dealing with even less than that actually have gone to a combat zone. So it's like anything else. If there's not that many people being affected, they're not really going to change anything.
I actually read a statistic recently. There were 400,000 students, well, young adults, 17 to 35, polled. Only 47% could name the 4 branches of the military, and only 17% thought to add on the Coast Guard.
The 4 branches that are part of the DOD.
Correct.
And then, actually, I think now, isn't the Coast Guard part of the DOD? They used to be, no, that's right, we had talked about this. It used to be Department of Transportation, now it's Homeland Security.
Correct. So, I think some people have forgotten we're at war.
It's been going on so long, and you know, the media, you know, doesn't always keep people. I mean, I remember growing up in the 60s. You know, you were, every time you turn the TV on, you saw Walter there, Cronkite, there we go. It's been a while. You know, in covering Vietnam. I mean, it was every single night.
Every night.
I mean, so.
We watched at the beginning when we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, but it's fizzled out.
And I think people really struggle with the concept of mental health and mental well-being. It's a subject that people are uncomfortable talking about. You think of the trauma that a family feels when their loved one is deployed, or when their loved one comes home. There's this moment of exhilaration. It's like this honeymoon period, and we just naturally assume everything's okay now. They're safely home, but what we don't understand is it's really the coming home. That's really when the hard work begins. It's when the challenges start happening, because these young men and women, while they're away being deployed, they're amongst their brotherhood and sisterhood. This is what they're trained to do, and they're in the theatre that they're meant to be performing this role. We have trained them meticulously to perform in that arena, but then we bring them home and we don't train them to come back. We don't train them to suddenly have no relevance. You know, that order and that brotherhood and that sisterhood that once was so much a part of their daily life has just suddenly disappeared. And you know, that's when some of these mental health challenges start to emerge, and our communities and our neighbourhoods don't talk about it. They don't extend a hand of friendship, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to have that conversation, so they just don't.
The knowledge isn't there.
Absolutely. So part of what we're doing is trying to educate communities to have that conversation, to recognise that the mental health challenges that all of us face, it's not just our veterans, it's every one of us. Just having a relationship, just being a part of a family means you've got mental health challenges. We need to make this as normal as having a conversation about diabetes. About having a conversation.
There's a lot of denial out there too.
Absolutely.
You know, there's nothing wrong with me.
Right.
And then, you know, but I mean, everybody else sees it, but the person that's experiencing it.
And that's often because of the labels that go with that. We're very good at labeling people, and we want to put people in a box rather than recognizing that what you're experiencing is actually a very normal reaction to what you endured.
You know, we know that the families are affected by the deployments. We've talked about that. Very much so affected. Can you tell the viewers how you are working with them to help the veterans?
We are compiling a clearinghouse of resources so that we can direct those families to support groups, agencies like the Easter Seals.
Yeah.
They have a wonderful program for our veterans. We are talking with the wives of widows. Some of them are coming forth from the Vietnam era and wanting to meet in groups.
Yeah.
We are trying to connect them as best as possible to those resources and walk beside them.
Because I think one of the issues that our families have is a deep fear of betrayal of their loved one if they ask for help. And the families that we spent time with and we've interviewed we did a year of research, was that they feel completely ill-equipped to know what the danger signs are. They feel as though they don't know what to watch for. So their loved one comes home, and again, there's this honeymoon period of their home, and they're safe, and everyone takes a big deep breath and a sigh of relief because the battlefield isn't the thing that they're worried about. And then all of a sudden, those cracks start to show. And at what point do you call for help? You know, we have young men and young women who have, you know, they can't sleep at night, they can't hold down a job, they're struggling to deal with anger that comes out of absolutely nowhere, and
all symptoms of PTSD.
Absolutely. And rather than dealing with it really early on and saying, you know what, that outburst wasn't characteristic of who you are, and that was such a displaced reaction, you know, together let's work this out. People stay silent. There's more domestic abuse that's not reported in the families of people who've been deployed because there's this awful feeling of guilt from the families. What has he just endured? I shouldn't say anything. I can't. And we wait too long. We wait until we have young men and young women who have, you know, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their family, they're maybe facing a felony charge, and at that point it's so much harder for us to intervene.
Or the 22 a day on average.
Absolutely.
That have committed suicide.
Absolutely.
A day.
And you just look at that number that we talked about before, of those 22 a day that take their lives, only 30% ever reached out for help to the VA. So what does that mean about that 70%? Why are we not reaching out and grabbing hold of them? Why aren't they accessing services? Because of the stigma.
During our earlier conversations, you had also said out of those 22, it doesn't include, would you say, Texas?
Yeah, it doesn't. Those original numbers don't include almost a quarter of this nation, and they don't include the National Guardsmen and those that are active duty. We lose National Guardsmen and active duty deployed men and women every day, and they're not included in that number.
So that 22 is obviously a very low.
Absolutely, and we know that 22, the suicides, the people we lose to suicide, even that number isn't accurate. Even the general public, it's so difficult to be able to capture it.
I think they give you is 35. If once again, as all of our shows, time just flies. I know we had talked a lot when I visited you guys about other topics that we can discuss, and I'd love to have you guys back in the future.
We'd love to come back.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things for this show. I mean, along with the crew here, John Wright, who's a director, he's been with us since day one. We've seen a lot of organizations and learned so much. And you had mentioned, I know, when about Beth Pritchard. You know, I mean, you do interact with a lot of these groups. And we just did a two-part show with her. But how do people become involved, and how do they find you?
Well, Resilience Grows Here is launching a peer-to-peer network. We know that nobody talks to a veteran like a veteran. So obviously, if people are interested, we have our website, www.resiliencegrowshere.org. The Farmington Valley Health District is available to answer any questions at any time. Resilience Grows Here is an initiative of the Farmington Valley Health District. We have a Facebook site. We would urge people to volunteer to become peers. If you have a family member you feel like needs a peer, reach out, let us know.
Yeah.
Okay. For those that don't know, the Farmington Health District is over in Canton,
Yes.
over by the job lot, as I found out.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be getting the that's it for today in my ear. So I want to thank you very much, both of you, for being here.
Thank you.
I apologize when we opened the show. I think I didn't shake your hand.
Well, you can do it next time. A double one for next time.
Okay, that's about all the time we have. Hope you found the show very informative. I'm sure you did.